This is Beyond the Business.
Let me start with something uncomfortable. If you listen to the conversation around maritime transport today, it sounds like we are on the edge of a breakthrough. New fuels, new strategies, new targets, new departments, and new roadmaps. And yet, when you strip all the language away, very little has actually changed. Ships still move because energy is released through chemistry. Chemistry is still governed by a finite set of elements. And physics still does not negotiate. This episode is not about optimism or pessimism, it's about realism. Because before we talk about solutions, transitions, or strategies, we need to remove the noise that has accumulated around decarbonization itself. Here is the first thing we rarely say it loud. The periodic table is finite. No matter how many conferences we organize, no matter how many task forces we create, and no matter how many targets we announce, ships can only run on what chemistry allows. There is no hidden fuel waiting to be discovered. There is no missing element that suddenly makes zero emission shipping trivial. What we have today is hydrocarbons, alcohols, hydrogen derivatives, nuclear is essentially the same chemical toolkit we have been refining for decades. That matters because it changes how we should think about decarbonization. Decarbonization is often framed as a mission, as a deadline, a finish line, something that can be achieved if we push hard enough. But in reality, decarbonization has always been a process. We have been doing it for more than a century, from coal to oil, from heavy fuels to cleaner blends, from crude combustion to efficiency recovery optimization. Nothing about this evolution was revolutionary. It was incremental, technical, constrained, and slow. What changed recently is not chemistry. What changed is the narrative. Decarbonization was turned into an urgent race, as if physics itself could be accelerated by management pressure. Entire organizational structures were built around the idea that the right coordination, the right leadership title, or the right strategy document could unlock a breakthrough. But breakthroughs don't come from organizational charts, they come from chemistry and physics. And right now, there is no fuel that can fully decarbonize global maritime transport at scale without introducing new constraints, new risks, or new dependencies elsewhere in the system. Nuclear energy already works, it has proven reliability and zero operational emissions. But it brings regulatory, geopolitical, safety, and port access constraints that make widespread commercial deployment extraordinarily complex. Everything else, methanol, ammonia, hydrogen, remains a trade off, not a solution. It shifts the burden somewhere else upstream emissions, infrastructure, safety, energy density, availability. So the industry finds itself exhausted. Exhausted by constant announcement, exhausted by repeated promises, exhausted by chasing a finish line that keeps moving. And this exhaustion is not a failure, it's a signal that decarbonization was framed incorrectly. Because decarbonization is not something the maritime industry can win, it's something the industry must live with continuously as technology evolves. It should not require permanent urgency, it should not require endless reinvention of governance, and it should not distract from the system actually doing its jobs, moving goods reliably, safely, and efficiently. There is too much noise around the problem that is fundamentally constrained. That doesn't mean nothing can be improved, it means improvement must be treated as evolution and not salvation. There is a framework that fits the world we actually live in today. It doesn't promise miracles, it doesn't pretend physics can be undone, and it doesn't shift responsibility to a single actor. But this episode is not about that. There is another thing that gets lost in the current conversation. Shipping is often portrayed as an industry that needs to start decarbonization, as if nothing was done before carbon targets appeared on slides. That's simply not true. Long before decarbonization became a headline, shipping was already reducing its environmental footprint not through slogans but through systems. Route optimization, speed management, loading and stability optimization, fuel efficiency improvements, voyage planning based on weather, currents, and energy consumption. None of this was framed as a climate action at the time. It was framed as a good seamanship and good operations. And it actually worked. Then came digital tools, decision support systems, fuel monitoring, performance analytics, trim optimizations, hull and propeller efficiency management. Again, not because of carbon targets, but because inefficiency at sea is expensive, risky, and visible. On top of that, shipping operates under one of the most comprehensive environmental rule books in any global industry. MARPOL alone governs air emissions, oil pollution, chemicals, sewage, garbage, and operational discharges. Ballast water management reshaped entire vessel designs and global logistics. Biofouling management addresses invasive species and ecosystems damage. Garbage management on board is controlled down to segregation, recording, storage, and final disposal. This is not a light touch regulation. This is systemic, audited, enforced, controlled, applied across flags, oceans, and jurisdictions. Very few industries operate under anything comparable. In fact, if you rank industries by how strictly environmental behavior is monitored in daily operations, shipping sits at the very top, second perhaps only to nuclear energy. And that matters because it changes the story completely. Shipping didn't wait for decarbonization to be invented. It didn't need a rebrand to start optimizing. It didn't require a moral push to reduce waste. What it did continuously was reduce harm where it was operationally possible, technologically feasible, and systematically enforceable. That doesn't mean emissions are gone. It means the industry has already extracted most of the easy gains, which brings us to the real tension. The remaining emissions are not there because shipping ignored the problem. They are there because what remains is constrained by physics, chemistry, and scale. You can optimize routes only so much. You can improve engines only so far. You can digitalize decisions, but you cannot digitalize energy density. And this is where the current narrative becomes dangerous. Because when industry that has already optimized itself for decades is told to accelerate without new physical options, what follows is not progress, it's pressure without leverage. That pressure creates noise, it creates departments without breakthroughs, it creates targets without pathways, and it slowly disconnects the conversation from reality. Let me ask you something. When we talk about shipping emissions, why do we always picture a ship moving across the ocean? Because a lot of fuel isn't burned while the ship is sailing. A huge share is burned while the ship is not going anywhere. Waiting outside the port, waiting for the berth, waiting for a terminal slot, waiting for paperwork, cargo readiness, because the schedule on paper and the reality on shore don't match. And that waiting is not free time. A ship can't just switch off and sit quietly. It still needs power, heat, pumps, lighting, safety systems. The crew is there. The equipment is running. The vessel stays in operational mode the whole time. So fuel is still being consumed even though nothing is moving forward. So that's the first blind spot. We keep thinking emissions come mainly from distance, speed, and engines, while a big part of the waste is simply time lost in the system. And that leads to the second blind spot. Shipping often gets treated like it owns the whole problem. But most delays are not created at sea, they are created on land. Port, terminals, yard capacity, paperwork timing, planning gaps, last minute changes, coordination across too many parties. The ship is just a place where all those small failures collect into hours and days. So the vessel becomes the visible emitter for a chain that leaks efficiency elsewhere. This is why the fuel conversation sometimes feels like it's missing the point. Yes, we can argue about new fuels and future technology, but if the system keeps wasting time in crews and cleaner fuel won't magically fix that, the ship will still burn energy while waiting. The name of the fuel changes, but the lost hours stay. If you want a real improvement, the lever is not only inside the engine room, it's in flow. It's in how ports and terminals plan, how documentation moves, how slots are allocated, how schedules are kept realistic, and how handovers are managed. Because you can't seriously talk about lower emission if the system is still built to waste time. And there is one more layer of downtime that is quietly becoming normal: climate. For decades, delays were treated as operational exceptions: congestion, paperwork, port inefficiency, things the system could fix if it wanted to. But weather volatility is different. It is not a process failure, it is an external force. And it is becoming more frequent, more global, and more disruptive, which means that delay is no longer something you explain after it happens. It is something you must build into the service itself. Reliable supply chain in the next decade will not be defined by speed. It will be defined by how honestly it prices and communicates downtime. This is why I believe the industry will eventually need a downtime climate index. It's just a suggestion, a transparent layer inside the delivery promise. Because the carrier who sells reliability without showing climate downtime exposure is not selling a premium service. They are selling a premium story. Let's pause for a moment and be honest about what shipping really is. Almost everything around us moves by sea: food, medicine, components, spare parts, industrial equipment. Things that simply cannot be produced everywhere or fast enough or at the scale modern life demands. This is not a niche activity. This is how the global economy stays alive day after day. And yet, shipping is still treated as if it were just another commercial sector. On paper, it looks enormous: huge fleets, massive assets, revenues counted in tens of billions. But when you look closer, something doesn't add up. The margins are thin, the profits are small compared to the scale of operations. A vast amount of capital, effort, and risk is absorbed just to keep things moving. This is not inefficiency, it is pressure. Shipping operates across borders, legal systems, regulatory regimes, and political expectations. A single vessel can comply with international rules, regional rules, port rules, and national interpretations of the same regulation, all within one voyage. There is no single license to operate for the world. Instead, there is a constant friction. More reporting, more compliance, more checks, more documentation, often overlapping, sometimes contradictory. Each requirement makes sense on its own. Together, they form a permanent load on an industry that already operates with very little room for error. And unlike many other sectors, shipping does not get to stop. It cannot pause, it cannot relocate easily, it cannot choose to serve only friendly jurisdictions. The cargo still has to move, hospitals still need supplies, factories still wait for parts, entire economies depend on ships arriving on time. This is why shipping feels less like a conventional business and more like critical infrastructure that is expected to behave like a private company. It carries global responsibility, but without global coordination. It delivers public value, but absorbs private risk. It is essential, but rarely treated as such. And that tension explains a lot of what we see today, not only in costs or margins or operational stress, but in how difficult it is to ask shipping to solve problems that are much bigger than the industry itself. Shipping already optimizes routes, manages loading conditions, invests in efficiency, follows some of the strictest environmental and safety frameworks in the world, not because it is fashionable, but because it has always been part of operating responsibly at sea. We often talk about shipping and energy as if they were abstractions, as if they could simply be redesigned by setting louder targets. But systems don't work like that. They move with physics, economics, and real world constraints. Shipping doesn't choose to be perfect, it chooses to work every day for the entire planet without pauses. And maybe the real question today is not how fast we want to change everything, but whether we truly understand what we are trying to change and who is paying for it.